Hello. This is a prepaid debit call from
Terry King.
an inmate at the Tennessee Department of Corrections, Riverbend Maximum Security Institution. To accept this call, press 0. To refuse this call, hang up or press 1. To prevent calls from this facility, press 9.
Stop and ask yourself, if you got a call like that, would you accept it, hang up, press 9 to keep future calls from ever coming through again? Well, when you find yourself reporting on death row, a call like that can come frequently. For Stephen Hale, that's at least once every couple of weeks. Stephen is our criminal justice reporter at the Banner. But before he came to us, he spent years reporting on Tennessee's death row. And since 2019, Terry King, the inmate on the other end of that line, has called Stephen from death row at least 100 times. Terry is one of several men who Stephen got to know while writing his new book, Death Row Welcomes You. Last month, I interviewed Stephen at Parnassus Books for his book release event. In this special episode, we're bringing you that interview, and I promise you'll want to keep listening.
David just handed me my phone because...
We've got a visitor.
We do.
We've got a visitor.
Yes. Terry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Stephen.
I'm Demetria Kalodimos. This is Banner and Company. I remember seeing Stephen Hale in court back in 2018. It was a trial over the drugs used for lethal injection. I must have casually dropped into the conversation that I visit death row, which is true. I have for many years. Well, that stuck with him, and he reached out to me saying he wanted to get in touch with the guys on Unit 2. That's death row. I told him there were lots of folks who visit Unit 2 regularly, like a guy I had met there named David Bass. Actually, he's the David that Stephen just referred to, who handed him the phone at the book reading.
Yeah, we've kind of got the family with the picket fence and the regular, normal family kind of thing there. And all of a sudden, Dad and husband comes home going, guys, I've got this great idea. I'm going to go to death row. And everybody looked at me like I was crazy.
Yes, David has a pretty fascinating story. He lives in Tennessee now and has for a long time, but he's from Alabama, where a former attorney general said we needed to, quote, fry people until their eyeballs pop out. And for a long time, David agreed with that. He was a death penalty enthusiast until he had a sort of spiritual awakening, which led him to visit our death row about 10 years ago. And that's where he met Terry King, who had been on Unit 2 for about 30 years by that point. That would be the first of countless visits since.
So I'm meeting with Terry one day. We had gotten to know each other. We call it our safe zone, which is strange, but I do call death row my safe zone. And so I knew it was safe, and it's safe because my friends out there care about me and love me, and they keep things I say in confidence. So in this safe zone, I go, Terry, this is going to be really weird, but I need to ask forgiveness of anybody who's ever been on death row and who's on there now or whatever. And I know you can't officially speak for everybody, but for a symbolic reason, would you do this with me? And he laughed like, what the hell are you talking about? But I said, no, Terry, I need to say something. And he said, I'll play along. And boy, I mean, Stephen, to sit on death row, we go through 8 doors that lock behind us. I'm sitting right in the middle of it, and I'm thinking, I am about to say to Terry that I used to go around and say, fry people till their eyeballs pop out. And I'm 100 yards from where the electric chair is. And I got this deep, I couldn't swallow. I was struggling, but I knew it was safe. And I said, Terry, I need to tell you this. And so I told him that story. Mm-hmm. Terry, being the kind, generous, caring, compassionate person he is, didn't respond. He looked with love. If I remember correctly, he even reached over maybe and touched me on the shoulder, kind of just some comfort there. And I said, Terry, I need to now ask if you could forgive me for that. He was very gracious, and he said he would forgive me, and we hugged. So that was a very powerful and solidifying part of mine and Terry's relationship.
I'm sure.
And But it was very hard for me to say
I'm sure.
that. So yes, I was coming from not just kind of being okay with the death penalty, but kind of being an ass in terms of, and it was because of no exposure. No exposure whatsoever.
Well, sure.
And
Yeah.
trying to be funny and cute and wanting people to like me, and quite frankly, the faith group I was with at that time, that was a positive thing to say in front of those folks.
Stephen Hale will tell you that meeting David Bass, someone who wouldn't call himself an activist, someone who went from believing men on death row should fry to calling them friend, was one of the big reasons he wrote his book, Death Row Welcomes You. Let's get into it. It's Banner and Company. Thank you so much. What a packed house. Exciting.
You all came. Thank you.
I am so happy to be with Stephen, a reporter and writer that I've admired always and can now happily call a colleague. So,
Isn't it really cool that Demetria is here? Everyone is psyched
and
about
congratulations on the book. Stephen, I know before you were a visitor, you're an official media witness. Tell us about that. You sign up for that, don't you? You volunteer.
Yes. So state law requires that the state let people witness their executions. And so and the state law even kind of dictates what types of media witnesses there will be. So there will be a few who are TV reporters and a few who are print reporters and a couple from the county where the crime occurred in that. And they do a lottery, which is a strange way to put it, but they literally have people submit to be witnesses, and then they pick them out, I guess, at random. And so when Billy Ray Irick was executed in 2018, I had been covering his case and writing about the death penalty a little bit and covering criminal justice. And I am prone to soapboxing a little bit. A lot of you know me. And one of the things that I always felt very strongly about was that if the state is going to do this to people, if it's going to execute people, they should at least let some of us kind of watch them do it and make sure they do it the way they're saying they're doing it, and that they don't lie to people about what happened afterwards. Which they still try to do, by the way, but at least there's some other people who were there. So after you say that enough times, you kind of feel obligated to do it yourself. So I volunteered to witness that execution and ended up witnessing 2 more after that.
And just to be specific, you witnessed both lethal injection and the electric chair.
Yes, so in 2018, Billy Ray Irick was executed by lethal injection, and then the state executed 6 more men over, the next year and a half or so, and several of those chose the electric chair.
Were you more scared to witness the chair?
I don't know. I don't know how to answer that exactly. There's something a little more nightmarish about it, you know? Mm-hmm. But it's one of the weird things about these execution methods is that so many of the ways that they do them you realize once you're there, are for the observers more than they are for the people.
In what way?
Well, lethal injection, in theory, is supposed to look like this medical procedure where a person just kind of calmly goes to sleep and you sit there and watch them. That's not, it turns out, what happens in a lot of cases, but that's the idea. And it seems to me that the main reason we do that is because if you put on a total horror show for people, they'll go out and talk about it, and we will all have to reckon with the fact that we're killing a person. But the electric chair, similarly, when we electrocute someone, they put a veil over their face, which of course serves no purpose except to keep me from seeing what a human's face looks like when they're electrocuted to death. That's just one of the things I think about a lot, that that we are kind of constantly searching for ways to do this that don't feel like we're executing people. But it turns out that it always looks just like killing a person, as far as I can tell anyway.
We all come to the doors of Unit 2 with our upbringing and with our personal feelings. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your attitudes towards capital punishment before and perhaps if they've changed after.
Yeah, I write a little bit about this in the introduction to the book, but I don't really feel like I had a opinion about the death penalty when I was young, or at least this is not something that my mom's here. This is not something we talked about in our house. When I was growing up, we didn't talk about the death penalty. I remember when Timothy McVeigh was executed because I remember seeing his face on the newspaper. And, but I don't, at a certain point, I recall feeling strongly that killing people who had killed people didn't make sense. And I did a high school, class project to that effect. Yeah, I don't think I really inherited a strong opinion on this. I was raised in a Christian home and in a Christian church, which has maybe a lot of different connotations depending on your experience. But for me, a big thing that I always carried with me was the idea that of grace and redemption, and that these things were possible, that they were good to pursue yourself, and they were good to offer to other people, and that an earth as it is in heaven wouldn't necessarily include killing people for their crimes. Once I started writing about this stuff is when I really, I think, developed more of a view about the ins and outs of it, and sort of the way that we carry it out here.
Before you knew some of the regulars, did it surprise you to see who was there to visit whom? I used to guess before I knew some people. When they'd walk in, like, I bet. Well, I was always wrong.
It is very funny. Because you go into this prison, which anyone who's visited a prison.
How many people have visited prison at all? Okay. How many are regular visitors?
These are the kind of crowd I bring out, isn't it?
Yeah.
Good. How many of you are just hanging out in the prisons?
Well, that helps us. We don't have to describe everything. Many
yeah,
of you know.
But then it's an ominous place to go by design, I suppose. And the first time I went to the prison here, Riverbend, I remember, this is a very maybe childish thing to think, but I remember a door slamming shut and it echoed so loudly. And I remember thinking, that really happens. They really do that. I associate it with movies, but it's like they really are these loud doors that, and you feel like you're trapped in there. Alvaro is sitting right here, who was a visitor out there and who told me something that I've never forget, which is that there's a very strange experience you have when you walk into the prison, and before you can move forward, the door always has to close behind you. And you don't realize that it's a very anxiety-inducing thing to walk in a room and have them shut the door behind you before they'll let you go any further. You do feel like you're trapped in there. To answer your question, though, it is very funny to go in that room and see it crashes through a lot of stereotypes you might have. I mentioned David Duncan, who is this very tall black man with cornrows, big guy, very, very kind of forceful personality. And his visitor was this older white woman who was sitting there talking to him, and I remember one time, I'm gonna forget this sweet woman's name, but I remember there was a woman who was an older woman who was a visitor, and she had gotten stopped at the door once because her jeans were too tight, which I think we were going to talk about the clothing restrictions out there. They had told this elderly woman that she couldn't come in because her jeans were too tight. And when we got back to the visitation gallery, everyone was talking about this. Isn't this outrageous that they stopped this woman from coming back here? And one of the guys on death row looked over at the jeans I happened to be wearing, which were skinny, let's say, and was like, well, how the hell did they let you in with that if they're going to kick? But so it is it's a funny collection of people.
And visiting has become much more difficult. You have to make appointments now. You have to call during an appointed hour. It used to be that if it was Monday night or Saturday, Sunday, and on rotating weekends, you could just drop in. Now it's much more complicated. I've got to just indulge me for one story.
Please, listen, I told everyone I was going to secretly just use this to interview you, so
No,
please
no.
talk.
I showed up once with a linen blouse. It was summer. It was like 100-something, and the corporal stopped me and said, I can see through that blouse. And I said, oh, come on, you can't. And she said, I certainly can, and you're out of here. So I went out to my car, and I thought, I've got to have a T-shirt somewhere. The only thing I had was a trash bag. And I bit a hole through it, and I put it on, and I made armholes, and she did not let me in. But I said, who can see through this?
If anyone could get away with that, you would think it would be Demetria, but they do not care, I'll say, to put it light. I mean, and the corporal, I assume you're talking about, really doesn't care.
Yeah, exactly. You're listening to Banner and Company. We'll be right back. So the great thing about this interview we did at Parnassus is that Stephen Hale and I have both spent a lot of time on death row. And so he even asked me some questions, like this one, about my dear friend Charles Wright.
I'm curious about your first time going out there, I know, was to interview some of these guys.
Yeah.
And that's how you got to know Charles. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but
put me on the spot. I don't care.
Demetria is in the book, and I write a lot about her relationship with Charles. Could you maybe talk a little bit about how you met him and how you guys got to know each other?
Sure. I was intrigued when someone told me death row is the most peaceful, tranquil, cooperative place you'll ever find in a prison. And I was like, oh, come on. Death row, everyone just bristles. And I wanted to see if that was actually true. And it took me a while to write up a proposal for the then commissioner to say, let me come out and talk to some of these people. Well, we went round and round, and finally I was allowed to come out with, a pad of paper, a pencil, and that's it. And guess what time they told the evening news anchor who works till midnight that I had to be out every Friday? 6 a.m. So, I think they were testing my dedication. Anyway, interviewed almost everyone. I still have my notes, which are amazing. And in the end, I thought, okay, here's my short list. I'm not going to, overstay my welcome, but here's 4 or 5 guys, maybe 6 guys I want to talk to. The commissioner will decide who you will talk to. So they ended up selecting Bill Stevens, who passed away, and Charles Wright. And they gave me 2 days, 1 hour, 1 bare room, and we had conversation on camera. But the thing about Charles, Bill was interesting, but Charles was so honest. The first thing he said to me when we sat down eye to eye in that first initial interview was, I did exactly what they tell you I did. I'm guilty. It was the one moment of my life that has changed my life. If I could take it back, I would. He was so open with his guilt and being honest with me from the jump that I thought, I really like this guy. We developed a great friendship. The funny thing is, we hardly ever talked about the case. Hardly ever. He wanted to he'd bring out his big motorcycle chopper book. We'd talk about great radio stations. We'd sing great songs. We'd play Name That Tune. He was a good friend. I'd forget that I was out there visiting a man who was set to die. And I can't tell you how heartbreaking it is when he starts saying, oh, I just got this pain in my leg. I think it's sciatica, or I think my back's going. And as it turns out, it was prostate cancer that had been neglected and had gone to the bone. And there was really nothing that could be done. It was funny because at that point in time, another individual on Unit 2 had prostate cancer and was treated with the radioactive seeds, and he was back, 100%. And Charles was really hoping that would be the case for him, but it wasn't.
I was always so moved by Charles's story, at least by the time I met some of the guys out there, because these guys really they were all triaging him in his prison cell because they knew that if he got too sick and if everyone could tell that he was so sick that they would move him to the infirmary and he'd be by himself.
Yeah, so he couldn't look sick.
So they were
his
literally
hair had
just
to be
keeping
great.
him
he had to be clean, his uniform, and one of the things about the uniforms that always struck me is they most likely start white, okay? But they're so permanently stained that they can never be washed white again. And isn't that a strange sort of symbolic thing that they're forced to wear these white uniforms that had turned yellow and stained and they can never scrub them off?
I don't think I knew that they started white.
Yeah,
Because
they actually
they're
were white
beige,
for a day,
yeah.
I think. Yeah, you describe them as beige. Alvaro, speak a little bit about his relationship.
Yeah, so you didn't know I was going to put you on the spot if you were here.
That's
did you?
all right.
No, but Alvaro, it was a very special person in all this, because when Demetria told me all this, I can,
Get on someone's list.
yeah. She's like, I can get you out there. I can introduce you to people. She introduced me to David, and David said, well, this was before Billy Ray Irick was executed in 2018, which was the first execution in Tennessee in nearly a decade. And he said, I know this guy who visits Billy Ray Irick, and I'll reach out to him. Maybe you can talk to him. And so he put me in touch with Alvaro, and it makes me think of what you just said about how you hardly talked to Charles about his case, because one of the things Alvaro told me is, he didn't look up the background of Billy Ray when he started going to visit him. Because that's not why he was out there. This guy's there now. I'm just going to go meet the person who is there now, and who, whatever he did before isn't really a part of our relationship. And I was always very moved by that, because there's a temptation. Especially being a journalist, I was like, I'm about to read all this stuff on these. There's a temptation to look up stuff about these people. Who is this person I'm talking to? What did they do? Are they innocent? Might they be innocent? I feel like you go through a lot of these sorts of things, but I was always very moved that Alvaro was like, I don't need to know that. That's not who I'm going to meet. And another thing I always think about, and I've told people a lot about Billy Ray, is that he, this is someone who had, I think it's probably fair to say, lived his most sort of stable years on death row. Not because death row is some great place, but because his life had been so unstable and so violent, and he suffered from mental illness before that. This was the first place he'd ever had where he had a community of people that knew him. He had a set schedule. He had 3 hots and a cot or whatever. I mean, he had stuff that he had never had reliably before. And so he had developed this community of people he would paint with. And I remember before, it must have been in the year leading up to Billy Ray's execution, that he, and I want to say it was Derek Quintero that he was painting with, had painted the signs of the cross.
Stations of the Cross.
Stations of the Cross. And, they painted these massive paintings. I was going to say this at the beginning. One of the things that I hope this book represents is just a testament to the fact that there are people out there. They're human beings, and you all being here, I think, it represents an acknowledgement of that. Whether you haven't read the book maybe yet, but to me it does. And these stories, that's what I took from them. That there are a lot of things that are true about a person, and Billy Ray Irick was convicted of a horrible crime, and decades later he was playing a card game with friends on death row and painting the Stations of the Cross, and we have to try to hold those things together. David just handed me my phone because
we've got a visitor.
We do.
We've got a visitor.
Yes. Terry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Stephen.
Don't go away. It's Banner and Company.
Terry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Stephen.
So this is Terry King. Terry is calling from Riverbend, and Terry is the man who I met in that passage who gave me the popcorn, and who now calls me frequently and has gotten to know, I'm going to try not to cry, but has gotten to know my family and asks about my wife's migraines and made a birdhouse for my daughters and is a part of my life. And I asked him if he would call so that he could be a part of this since he can't be here. Terry, there's actually people here. I think I probably told you I wasn't sure if anyone was really going to come, but there is a whole, we got a lot of people. I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but there's a bunch of people, they're all staring at me holding this phone in front of a microphone. I want you to I wish you could be here. And what I would say to everyone is that this is a person who I would let sleep in my house. So I wish that he could be here, and I think that he should be. But since he can't be, I would love for you to have the chance to just, I don't know, what I want you to have the chance to speak to this crowd. This book is a lot of your story, so.
Well, just the first thing, congratulations to you in writing this. Never in a million years did I think when I met you through David that wasn't an agenda of ours. We were just meeting and becoming friends and that sort of thing, just like anyone else. I mean, when I think of the times that we've laughed so hard here on a Monday night, more than anything, I just want to tell everybody, thank you for supporting Stephen. He's an amazing guy. He's an incredible husband. He's an amazing father. And he's just an all-around good human being. And it's an honor and a privilege to know you and to be able to call you and to call you friend and have you call me friend. And so I thank you for that. I just hope that people will support you in this, and more people will read it. And more than anything, I think I want people to see us as human beings, people that breathe, laugh, cry. We're not monsters, and we're just human beings, and we love and deserve to be loved. And I certainly have felt that with you, Stephen, and I thank you for that.
Hey, Terry, it's Demetria Kalodimos. I've got a question. I've often wondered what you guys think and how you feel when you walk out those doors and we leave, because I always have profound feelings when I'm leaving after a visit. What do you guys go through? Do you go back and be quiet? Do you discuss your visits? What do you do?
To be honest, you long to go with your family and friends. You want to leave that door as they go out that door. And oftentimes, I went when I was in a different pod, and I could see the visitors walk up the sidewalk. I'd run back to my room after I was searched to look out through the window and watch them go up the sidewalk, and wishing and longing so much to walk with them. But while you're happy to see them be able to leave, you certainly want to go with them, but you can't, but you're always with the people you love and care about in thought and in prayer. And my friends never leave me. Stephen never leaves me. David never leaves me. Hale never leaves me if he's there. And the privilege I had of meeting you before, Demetria.
Terry, just and you're welcome to hang out on the phone, but the only other thing I don't want to make you talk too much with your after your surgery, but the only other thing I was going to ask you is, I know we don't have to get too much into I know they're kind of restricting some of what you can do in arts and crafts, but one thing that I always love when I talk to you on the phone is you often give me an update about what you're working on. Can you tell everyone what kind of, either what you're in the middle of working on or what the last thing you made was?
Oh, sure. I can tell you about the last thing. Maybe David can share a picture. I've had the honor and the privilege of meeting by phone the tight end of the Buffalo Bills, Dawson Knox, and his father. I met them in 2022 through a friend of mine, Jeff Dobides, and they arranged a phone call, and also with their with Dawson's brother Luke, who has since passed away. I made Dawson this gift, and it's on a plaque. It's a replica of the Buffalo Bills field. It has the end zone in it. It has the Buffalo Bill logo on the front. And I thought, and I made like a 3-wheeler trike. It's all made of cedar. It's a Harley. David can show you if he's got a picture of it there. I think he does. And it is like the engine and stuff on it. I love making gifts and giving them to people. It's just, and I spend my own money doing it. That's no big deal, but I just love doing that. So that's the last thing I've made, and currently we're not allowed to do anything like that. They've kind of shut our arts and crafts down when it comes to woodworking and stuff, which absolutely makes 0 sense. There's not been one single incident, and but we love giving gifts to people and making them happy, and that's one of the things that we can do. That while we can't be with people necessarily per se out there, there's ways to share our, the things that we create, the art that we create, and it's a lot of fun to do, especially when you bring a smile to someone's face and show them a little love along the way.
Thanks for sharing that, Terry. Yeah, and there's a few people here who have some of these items, but the stuff these guys make is truly incredible. Demetria knows too. It's wild. Clocks and jewelry boxes and all kinds of stuff.
I've made a rocking horse for David's grandson. Everything, toy boxes for children. It's just great to give gifts, and it's something that will last forever. My hope is that David's grandson will share it with his son someday, and it will last forever. So one little cool thing about that rocking horse, what I did is on the eye of the horse, I put the little boy's name is Walt. So I put his name in the eyeball of the horse. So, and the story is the horse only has eyes for Walt. And I thought that was a cool little touch. Maybe David has a picture of that, can share that as well. But I put a leather saddle on it and everything. But anyway, thank you for allowing me to have a voice tonight to speak, and just thank you so much, Stephen, and God bless you. And I just look forward and hoping the book does extremely well. And your family, I'm sure, is very, very proud of you, as I am.
Thanks a lot, Terry. I appreciate you calling in. I know the phone will hang up at some point, but I'll set you on the table here. You can hang out with us for a little bit if you want.
Sure, I'll listen
in. When we had that flurry of executions, it got routine. Even the local TV stations weren't showing up at all, right?
Yeah, it was very strange because the first execution in 2018, it got global coverage. There was some writer from England DM'd me on Twitter like, "Oh, I've been following this," because it was executions in the United States have been on a downward trajectory for 20 years, and most even states that had the death penalty weren't executing people anymore, or not very often, and death sentences have been going down. If you look at it zoomed out, it's a thing that's going away. But Tennessee was kind of bucking that trend and going the other way, and so it was this very big event. There were 7 of these in 2 years or less. So by the time you got to the 5th, 6th, 7th execution, there were even the couple guys that come out to the prison to cheer on the executions weren't showing up. So yeah, it did kind of take on a little more. The last. I want to say the last execution that I went out there for, not to witness, but to stand outside, there's this large field that after, people will gather in. Some of the folks who know guys on death row or who support them will have a kind of vigil before these executions. And I went out there because I was covering the execution for the scene. And there's a ton of security on the nights they do these executions. So you go through a few checkpoints, and I drove up to one of these troopers, and he leaned in the window, and this is like the 7th execution in 2 years. And he goes, you know where you're going, right? And I was always just so haunted by that. This guy was just like, you kind of know where to go. You know how we do this. Like, we just, it was all very, it's a machine that was rolling. And it only stopped because of the pandemic.
When you started digging into some of the backgrounds of Billy Ray and Ed Zagorski and some of the people, were you prepared to learn what you learned?
No. I think that the idea that people who end up on death row like might have some mental illness issues, or that they probably had a rough childhood, is probably like something that maybe you kind of assume or that makes sense. What ended up happening is as these guys were approaching their execution dates, they would submit clemency applications to the governor, basically a big old file of, pleading for the governor to grant them clemency and mercy, essentially. And in those packets, a lot of times would be all the mitigation investigation that had been done on these guys. Some of my former colleagues at AK Investigations are in the crowd today, and they do this kind of work, which is basically digging into these guys' lives, trying to talk to their parents, grandparents, friends, families, school teachers, get all their health records, all their school records, and try to be able to paint a picture of a person that's sort of more of the whole picture of them and not just this crime. But when the guys in this book were sent to death row, people weren't really doing this, and even if it was happening a little bit, the courts weren't taking it as seriously, and so the juries that convicted them and sentenced them to death never heard about their childhood. They didn't hear about their mental illness. They didn't hear about that Billy Ray Abrick was 6 years old when someone said we should send this kid to a state hospital because he's mentally ill. They didn't hear about Ed Zagorski sleeping in a house with holes in the floor and holes in the roof and strategically digging holes in his backyard so that when his mother chased him to abuse him, that she would trip and fall into the holes and not catch up with him. Like, they didn't know about all this stuff and the sexual abuse that these guys have experienced, or the physical abuse, or the poverty that they lived in.
Charles Wright eating out of a dumpster.
Yeah, Charles Wright, who Demetria got to know, that's some of the most harrowing stuff I've ever read, is the interviews with his family and his siblings about how they grew up, about how he got connected with the heroin dealer in the neighborhood who used him as a tester. And so Charles is a 14 I forget, very young kid, and is being used to test the strength of the heroin that they're selling in the neighborhood,
His Metro school record in kindergarten showed 152 days absent.
Yeah, and I think...
Where do you go from there?
You asked if I was prepared to learn all that. I think the thing that a lot of people have asked me if this changed my opinion of the death penalty. It didn't really change my opinion of the death penalty as like a policy. It made me a lot more humble about the fact that I'm doing a book event in Green Hills instead of in prison. Because I was just born to my parents, who are lovely people, but they were just born to people. We didn't control any of that. I wasn't hit. I wasn't sexually abused. I didn't grow up in poverty. And yes, there are a lot of people who overcome those things, and that's amazing. But I would sit there and read these files, Charles's file, and go, if you put me in this person's position, like, how confident am I that I would be doing this instead of where they are? And I'm not very confident of that.
Banner & Company is a production of the New Nashville Banner. Our producers are Steve Haruch and Andrea Tudhope. The original music is by Verlin Thompson. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, or go to NashvilleBanner.com. Special thanks to Sarah Arnold and all of our friends at Parnassus Books. You're in good company.